Smith. I want to welcome John and his spouse Elaine to the University of Colorado. They got here last night, and we've kept them totally busy since then, so we're going to continue with that right on through the afternoon. I want to first note that we really appreciate the generosity of the Cox family for funding this visiting lecture occasion. It's really an important occasion for the University of Colorado and certainly for the Religious Studies Department and all those people interested in the study of religion. Over the last 40 years, Jonathan Smith has been central to the emergence and shaping of the study of religion. His many and broad-ranging publications, his active presence, his example, his experience as professor and dean of the college at the University of Chicago have served as both model and guide for everyone in the field. The level of richness of his work and the continuing publication of his work have served as a model and a guide for everyone. And we continue to be provoked and engaged by his readings, as you'll see through this afternoon's event. It's really important at this time. He has had an influence on the last 40 years of the study of religion, and at this point we're sort of poised at the cusp of beginning the next era of 40 years. And I invite you all to come to his lecture tomorrow night. It's in Eaton Humanities 150. It starts at 7 p.m. There are brochures about that lecture, and it has the provocative title, "Now You See It, Now You Won't, the Future of the Study of Religion Over the Next 40 Years." I also want to thank Greg Johnson, the department chair, the Religious Studies faculty and staff, and students in my Smith seminar for working so hard to put this whole event together. They've done a great job, and I really appreciate what they have done. This conversation really unfolds out of the seminar on Smith's work that we've done. Students mostly are over here and up here. So what we did was read a good deal of the work that Smith has published. And over time, then we began to focus on certain areas that we thought would make a really nice conversation. So the students have really settled on 5 areas. These are available in a brochure that you picked up when you come in, hopefully. And we're going to have each group that does one of these questions come up on the stage, ask their question with a bit of background. Jonathan, he may then respond to it as extensively as he likes or not. They may have some follow-up questions, you may have some follow-up questions, and we're going to restrict each question to 25 minutes. After the third question, or maybe earlier if Jonathan needs it, we'll have a break, and then continue on. So we will be restricting the time, and if you don't have a brochure, let us know. Anybody not have one, so we can follow them, because that will help you definitely with it.
So before we start, could I remind you that Professor Smith has also very generously agreed to meet with some students in my course on the 60s, and this session tomorrow morning is open to everybody to talk about how the various social and political cultural trends of the 60s related to the academic study of religion. Tomorrow morning, 9:30 in Helms 255. Thank you.
Okay, so silence the cell phones, please. And let's let the conversation begin.
That is Not Territory has been an incredibly influential piece of scholarship in the past 30 years. In this time period, post-structuralism has developed as a powerful and influential field of thought within the academy and has expounded, complicated, challenged, and furthered the concept of discourse as math, as something other than experience. Post-structuralism, in challenging and dissecting the traditional academic places to stand as a field, has encountered a similar problem that you, Professor Smith, have addressed in your work, that of having no place to stand. The issue of the scholar being either a theoretical position of infinite regress or that of silence. Derrida offers play, Baudrillard offers seduction, you offer incongruity and the joke, as that cartographic realm in which scholarship finds a place to stand. Now, 36 years after you first gave the Math is Not Territory lecture, play and incongruity have emerged as theory and method for scholarship. As developed and defined by you, Professor Smith, play as method seeks to rectify the stances and statements of earlier scholars who, by contemporary standards, operated within faulty pretenses of scholarship, and whose perspectives were dictated by a worldview now understood to be anachronistic and politically incorrect. Additionally, play as method seeks not only to remedy the missteps of previous scholarly work through a rigorous examination of textual sources, but also serves to redefine the academic study of religion as the play and display of hierarchy, power, and position within the field through a system of interpretation, translation, and redescription. This alternative approach to the academic study of religion ultimately serves to promote a heightened sense of self-consciousness in the scholar. Knowing that one truly cannot take a thoroughly objective stance, the scholar must oscillate between poles of interpretation separated by degrees of difference so as to construct a map of a particular religious territory. Professor Smith, you have written that we, quote, need to reflect on and play with the necessary incongruity of our lives before we set out on a voyage of discovery to chart the worlds of other men. How, if at all, will scholarship concerning the play of incongruities better enable us to understand and write about peoples, cultures, and societies which are different than ourselves? As the Dean of the College at the University of Chicago and as a lifelong academic, do you believe that we can or ever will get to the worlds and experiences of other men and women? Could a method of scholarship based completely upon one mode of human experience, that expressed within written language and cognitive analytic thought, be considered a firm place upon which to stand? It seems that many fields of study are becoming increasingly self-referential. The scope of their dialogue is increasingly specialized and therefore limited to the particular lexicon of their particular field. Professor Smith, do you see the possibility of play as method operating within interdisciplinary study? If not, would the current academic stance not then result in an increasingly isolated position within the multiple planes of human phenomena, which may notably exclude contemporary studies on various functions of the human brain-body interaction, as well as the realm of virtual reality seen typified by media?
That's a simple question. Dozens of parts. I just want to make it clear what Sam said, 25 days, that was a set question. Let me start a little bit in the middle and work back out to the two edges. I don't think play is a method. I think it's an attitude. I think it's a personal discovery that you might use. I think it's a way of describing a set of operations that are, how do I put it, not obvious, not flat-footed, not factual, not given above all. Why I don't think it's play is because it's sort of make it up as you go along, a kind of proposition, and lots of modes of play have more rules than I think I necessarily accept. But I use the word, and I actually use the word playful, as a way of standing for our settle for things as they are, things as they appear to us, to try to find a language to talk about how active we are in bringing things together that for no good reason of their own would have been brought together. They don't co-occur except in our heads or in our studies, or I suppose if you pull one tube into another tube for a living in our laboratories, but they don't necessarily belong together. And so if studying things as they are is a very serious thing, and it usually is. When I was a student at divinity school, believe it or not, working for a bachelor of divinity degree, because it was not augmented good old days, that was the only way for me to get a degree in the study of religion. Everything was very serious. So I wrote a dissertation all about Fraser as a jokester, just to express my pissed off states. Religious studies. I think that was a youthful, I should call it an expression, that was a youthful protest. And it, however, introduced me to literature about play, and especially literature about joking, which has, among other things, that dimension of incongruity. And it seems to me that if one tries to shift the impetus, the notion of comparison, from comparing things because they're similar to comparing things with respect to how they differ, which has always been built into the definitions of comparison. There's even a grammatical distinction compared to and compared with. One's signals similarity, the other signals difference. But we've always acted as if comparison was y'all come, y'all the same. And so in an attempt to say, well, if work was doing the one, then what the hell? Let's say playful is being the other. It's focusing on things that don't belong together unless you bring them together. Then that means, and that's where this reflective business, just slightly nervous about, comes in. Because if you're the only reason that they're together, you better be able to explain why you're putting them together. And those require a measure of reflexivity. Then there's a second kind of, you might call it a comparison. There's a second kind of thing that you alluded to. And that is, well, let's not leave it all up to one person putting it together. Let's get a whole bunch trying to put it together. That word interdisciplinary. It's a word I rarely use because in my sense of the term, it doesn't have the necessary relaxation that I would like. Because I don't understand, if you bring two disciplines together, you produce a Venn diagram. You produce a very small area where they usefully overlap. Most of what they do is to do their own business. Most of what the other one does is to do their own business. But you find something, so in my language, being interdisciplinary is by necessity being narrower than the two disciplines that are being okay? And so I'm always in trouble on this one because if I work with my definition, it's not what you mean. And so I would just say a plurality of approaches. And that at least gets us out of this very serious word, discipline. Foucault told us not to fuck around with the word discipline. Okay? You wouldn't want to see it coming. If you had to. It reminds us, after all, of the original sense of experimentation was torture. You tortured the elements. You poured acid on them, heating them, doing all sorts of terrible things in order to force them to give up their truth. Well, Jesus, that sounds awful. But I want to say something. There's a lot of fussing, and I'm going to have to answer it briefly in terms of one of the questions this afternoon, and it's going to be one of my future predictions for tomorrow. We do actually have a field now in religious studies that bids to be not only a science for the first time, but has the possibility of being an experimental one. That's within certain of the areas of cognitive science. One of the things I've employed is comparison as experiment. From Holmes, who invented the idea of a social science on, we've been largely aware that, thank God, we're not really allowed to freely experiment on human subjects. We really can't put a fire, pour acid on, and do all those other things. And it's just, well, because I know a number who would be perfectly willing to do it. So we can't really experiment in that sense. I really am not allowed to starve one of you and feed one of you to see what causal difference it will make. I mean, that's not permitted. But if what one does when one experiments is to some degree interfere with an environment, that at least mentally is what we do when we experiment. We put things together that don't belong together. And to that degree, we're mucking with their integrity. So that degree, I would describe that, insisting that it's still being in a way playful, as something that is imaginative. We did allude to that at the end. I think it was a slip of the typewriter. I don't like the notion of anything being the method. Sam was in it with me when I edited the HarperCollins Dictionary of Religion. I wrote an entry of the word the cross, the Savior, the book, the temple. That's not just a little definite article, man. That's a big statement. That is a statement of saying nothing you'll ever see in your life is like the whatever that follows it. And it's more frequent in Christian discourse than in others. But of course, they're more not like anything else. Everybody else. No wonder. So the method is much one method. There are lots of sorts of methods. But a method, unlike the results of applying a method in our field, has to be able to be replicated. So it builds in something forward. We really can't say we used to work on exegesis. We really can't, or they'd all be out of business, and duplicate the exegetical results of two exegetes of Scripture. I mean, the whole enterprise will be over the next day. But we can ask them to account for how they got that. And if they're honest, if they're honest, we could replicate that. We wouldn't necessarily get the same results, but we would replicate what they chose to privilege. We would replicate how they chose to dissolve, if I could use an acid kind of word, dissolve the text. So in that sense, even if someone is wandering around arguing they're not the method, like the temple, we've done something that I think is important. What protects us from the tyranny of anything is that we do our work in a corporate setting. That's what saves us. Now, it also leads to this incestuous bit as we get too close. It also leads to the jargon that I hear you in some way protesting. It leads to all of this in-group behavior, which is not surprising. But it also means that I can't do what I do without somebody calling me short on it in some way. Either to go up to this wrong, or as polite as, how did you get there? What are your assumptions? Okay? But I've got to do that. I'm not allowed. I'm not old enough to be allowed to trust it out on my own. Okay? That's a very important thing. That's what stops that tyrannical bug. Because if only to sell a book, someone's going to stand up and say, no, that's not the case. There's another method. So I guess preliminarily, that's the way I would describe it, because you should talk back. You all should talk back, however it's arranged. You guys got both? What are your assumptions?
Okay, then other questions? We have a full balcony, by the way, those of you down here. So. Any questions? Step up, be fearless. Yes, Lisa.
Towards the end of your question, as you mentioned something about, this question of whether or not we're accessing any sort of experience or if we're just talking about maps and whatnot. And I'd like to hear Professor Smith speak about how that pertains to this whole brain body thing and the idea of our existence being corporate, and that's what saves us.
Well, you caught me, of course, is what I deliberately stayed away from. We don't have access to other people's experience. I'm not going to now that I have access to my own experience. That I want to remember it. I'm very nervous about that kind of language. I'm nervous about it in part because despite a century at least of work, we've had a lot, we still cannot get out of the bracket individual before we say the word experience. We really have not yet persuasively found a way to talk about interpersonal, inter-individual, corporate experience. And that's a great problem for the entire human science. And I'm not sure that the graphs and so on that my cognitive friends are coming out with is really going to settle that one. It may talk about certain very formal things that are in common, but it's not going to get to what at least we have tended, particularly in this century, to invest the word experience with. Experience used to be simply a kind of a sensory recorder of all that stuff that was coming from us, from the world. But we made it much more encompassing than that now. It's much more active. It's not as passive as it used to be. And so I'm not persuaded that I've seen anything that really tells me how we get at experience unless it gets coded in some way. And there, one of the issues is the narrowness of what we understood to be possible modes of coding, tending to limit it to linguistic phenomena. And my own sense is that we're going to pay for everything from body language, we're going to pay a lot more attention to other ways in which we decode our experience. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. It's a tough and big question. It may be the Grail. The Grail. The business, I don't expect to see anyone make a good crack at it. But that's a fairly safe prediction.
Professor Smith, you talked about play in terms of things that don't belong together unless you bring them together, unless you put them in juxtaposition. Would you add any caveats to that? Is there anything that you think shouldn't be brought together in the active study of religion? Have you encountered anything personally where you felt a sense of regret about bringing things together or seen that in the work of others?
No, I can't say I have. I certainly think there are private limits to the question. I'm not sure I want to generalize around to appeals limits. Obviously, you're playing always with degrees. You're playing with degrees of similarities, you're playing with degrees of dissimilarities. And I suppose if you could persuade me that you had two things that were absolutely, inalterably, in all respects, different, I at least would wonder the efficient or economic question, why are you spending time on it? But if it implies that there's anything in principle off limits to comparison, I think my answer would be no. I can't think of something that is. I think some things to probably look at. I I can think of comparisons you probably ought not to commit in front of some sorts of public, but that's a prudential portion. It's not a limit to the procedure. Yes.
I'm curious about the idea of comparison of experiment, because in experiments we typically think we're bringing two things together to then figure out some sort of objective truth about the way things work in reality. Is there an analogy between what you're trying to get from comparison? How does the end result?
Well, I'm going to resist the temptation to come after the objective truth about reality part of what you're saying another way. Which is that really what we're doing is we're after something like a cause in some sense of the word. And in my language, the best we do in the human sciences, I think it's not all that different. What we really are trying to do in experiment things outside of what we call variation and denominator variation is you're really trying to reduce the phenomenon to being an example of an already known phenomenon. That's what you're trying to do. And it seems to me that one way of doing that, or at least so I've argued in human sciences, is to try to translate one sort of language into another sort of language. An example usually is Durkheim, the language of religion, which for him was the unknown, and translated into the language of society, which for him was the known. Now that it's not the same as, but it's as close as I can become. We are making religion, and in this particular example, another instance of an already known phenomenon in his particular example of society. So I think we can do that. I think we can, in fact, if there are countries to do it, do concomitant variation. We can observe that some things do vary when other things occur. What we can't do is do a controlled experiment about that. I sometimes tell my class the first time I ever saw a controlled experiment, and obviously didn't have any effect since I still smoked like a fiend, was two little goldfish bowls in biology. Happy little goldfish, they dropped a cigarette, and one of them, unhappy little goldfish, happy little goldfish. I worried about the unhappy goldfish. It occurred to me the cigarette is what made them unhappy, so I really wanted to get them out of there. But we really can't do that kind of stuff with you and me. But we can, for instance, do what Durkheim did. If they have a square village, chances are they'll tell you the world is square. If they have a round village, chances are they'll tell you the village, the world is round. Notice, by the way, that that's a translation too. By scripture, Eliade, I would tell you, if they had a round world, they'd make their village round. If they had a round square cosmos, they'd make their village cosmos. That is, you run it one way or the other, but in both cases, you could argue for a measure of concomitant variation. What you can't do is use it to definitively isolate a cause. That's not, again, I think for moral reasons, not all legal ones, but for moral reasons, you probably oughtn't to find two identical twigs and drop one in a bucket of nicotine and the other in a bucket of water just to see what happens.
Another question? Anybody upstairs? Yes.
Speaking of Eliade and all that, it might.
I don't do that every day, you know, but okay. Yeah.
And comparison, it seems like Eliade maybe came with an idea of what religion was and maybe applied that, in a lot of situations where maybe it didn't exactly fit the way that he applied it. But could it be said that is there a component or aspect of all what we call religions that actually makes them a religion? You know what I'm saying? Is you mentioned that it justifies comparing them all as related?
Two things, but there are two questions. Eliade never made a comparison. He never recognized difference. He never made a comparison. What he did was write what grammarian would call paracaxis. You know, there's a run-on sentence. And he just goes from country to country to country to country. He never paused and actually compared anything. He just assumed he'd weigh you down and say, oh my God, they really are kind of alike, aren't they? That's not comparison. That's wrong. That's just a heap. There are times there's a difference between a heap of things that are alike and a class of things. And that's the kind of argument I would make here. Simply putting together a great heap of things. Now, there damn well better be something that you can specify that makes religion, or we've lost our subject. It's not to be looked at lightly. I suspect that Eliade wouldn't like it, most people wouldn't like it, because it's going to have to be something terribly formal. It's not going to be context-rich, because the content varies like mad. It's going to have to be something as simple and as straightforward as saying that religion is a culture's interactions with cultural reimagined beings or something. Who's going to have to say? It has to go spiral. Or it's going to have to go cognitive and say with counterintuitive beings. That is, one of the qualities of religious texts is their guys walk through walls and most of the rest of us don't. So that's the litmus paper, all right? But it needs these other things too. You have to kind of have some notions about them, and then most importantly, you have to be able to interact with them, which means some notion of yourself as an actor and of them as actors. And that may be the counterintuitive part of it all right? Something you can't see, nonetheless acts. But it won't be anything dramatic, like belief in God or golden rule or some damn thing like that. It won't be that kind of a universal. It will have to be something formal that you want to say is peculiar enough to religion to make it a category unto itself. Just a class unto itself. Let me interrupt myself. There's a big question. That which has screwed up the question for a long time is to take religion as the unique beginner, by which I simply mean as if it were a kingdom. You only have the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, and there may be a third one. They're still fighting about that one. And there it's easy. No chlorophyll, no plants. Except for a well-known list of exceptions. The people agree, even though it doesn't have chlorophyll, it's a plant anyway, because it sure as hell ain't an animal. That's very big. You don't get to make those kind of definitions, I think, most of us ever in our lives. That's as big as it gets. What we're actually talking about is one mode of cultural formation, or one mode of social. You're already speaking in a theory here. One mode of human behavior, one mode of social, one mode of a human institution. You see, it's a genus within a bigger class. So one of the things that decides the class it forms in, and then you don't have to find the equivalent to chlorophyll. It's not that big a deal. After all, you said it's one next to a number of others that already is subordinated to a bigger group of things. So you don't have quite the pressure that we used to think we had on us with that one to find the equivalent to chlorophyll, because it ain't there. You really can't find it. So it's a quieter question now, and here then a variety, not just a single characteristic, but a variety of characteristics, largely of a formal nature, because the one size has to fit them all. is going to be. So if you want to say, you know, that people talk in myths and active rituals, that you can try a whole lot of these things, and those won't be 100% satisfactory. By the way, it doesn't hurt. It helps that you're going to think of exceptions. Because what is really interesting to a student is not what fits neatly within the class. What's of interest to a student is what's teeter-tottering at the edge, because that sharpens your definition. Just, oh, one more of the same doesn't do you much good. Maybe, but then again, look at that, maybe not. You have a whole career ahead of you. So it's an important thing. The purpose of an exclusion, the purpose of a definition, after all, is not as in our liberal moods we claim, you all come. The purpose of the definition, the word means the same word as finite. It means build a fence around it, limit it. Not everything one can be, should be, or given the power we have to explain things, would we want it to be religion? So here's the fence, and here's some things that sit on, genuinely sit on the fence, depending on what you do. Go to the Supreme Court, anything you deeply care about, American Heritage Dictionary, number 4, football is my religion. How are you going to block it? Well, you can block it by saying that now we're killing men. When you said you're ultimate third, you meant conservative the ultimate, which is not damn good either, but nonetheless. But you see, I mean, you're going to get all those teeter-totter things, and that's where scholarship comes alive. Simply say, here's another instance of something we already know very well. It's nice always to have another one, but it's, that's incongruity, that's play, that's dealing with something that's kind of fun. Maybe it will, and maybe it won't. Really, own it. Watch American Idol next week and find out.
Let's move to the second question. You guys are off the hot seat. Yes.
Why the hell do I get so
All right.
2004, the Dalai Lama invited 5 neuroscientists to Dharamsala for a conference on the developing research on brain plasticity. Unlike earlier research that asserted that the brain stopped developing during childhood, these scientists claim that the brain develops reflects the lives we lead throughout our adult experience. The brain and the mind are part of a two-way street, each one affecting the growth and change of the other. The conference concerned the findings of the malleability of the brain when confronted with religious practices such as meditation. Meditation was found to directly change the structure of the brain as well as the mindset of the individual. Through repetition, the practitioner was able to recreate his or her identity, for repetition builds sensory motor patterns that underlie cognition. In other studies, neuroscientists have pointed to a change in a neurological state during prayer and meditation that creates an experience of self without boundaries. All these scientists are concerning themselves with how religious experience relates to the brain. In your early career, you were interested in the hard sciences, particularly with the study of grasses and geography. With your grassroots in science, do you believe that there is merit in incorporating neuroscience into a religious studies content? Also, as you have demonstrated with your work, early anthropological studies are littered with chauvinism and discrimination. Human beings, scholars included, are not completely objective. Science, on the other hand, is concerned with quantitative data. Recently, neuroscience is opening a door to studying ritual, not simply text about religious action, about ritual action. Can neuroscience be a vital way for living religious people to be studied without being overly reductive?
I understand you put the risk of giving away part of tomorrow, but I will. Seems to me that cognitive studies is related to more time, raised Rome, really hardwired stuff to much looser sort of things. I might stop it. I won't tell you which stock I'd sell, but I might stop it. This is all field. And I take their work very seriously, even though I'm getting old and I can't do with them what I demanded of myself or every other dude tender to come along, which is I don't only read them, but I read all the people they cite. I want to know what they're relying on. And, I'm just willing to pass it and do that with this. But I've read enough, and I've talked to a number of players, that I have a sense that they are the first time we have seen religion, the study of religion, living as a science and not as an interpreter yet. That's the sense of data, the cognitive, unschoolability of data. It's good data too. But we have largely settled for our classification. All during the 19th century, we either did science, which was causal, experimental, all those kinds of things, or you did interpretation. And I'm happy with that T-shirt, by the way. A lot of people now are very uncomfortable. I love the T-shirt that says interpretation. It doesn't sell very well. Here we have a group that is going to ask all the questions, and they're going to answer them. So they're the first to, I think, genuinely accept the science model rather than an interpretative model. They are causal. Tom Lawson has a sentence that I like because it represents a translation of the sentence. So, whatever it takes, whatever it is that explains how the human mind works in general, will explain how the human mind works in particular. There it is, that perfect paradigm of making the one thing an instance of the other. There's nothing added when you turn to wondering about religious cognition. I like that very, very much. I agree with what you're saying. What's been remarkable for anyone interested in religion is this is a field that has been, in fact, more concerned with ritual and with action than it has with the area of belief. It uses belief to make its counterintuitive part of its argument, and then really seems to lose much interest in it. It comes up with interesting analogies. Belief spreads like an epidemic. There should be an I can't say the goddamn thing. Whatever it is that people study epidemics, there should be that kind of study of what we call the transmission of the tradition. Makes a difference somehow if it's above. So now, having said all this, I got to borrow words because without any new, nothing up the sleeve, will explain how we're religious. We have reduced the religious line to whatever you want. Real approaches, the theology, the folk taxonomy of whatever things they've read all over the place. So it is in fact reductive, and I'm pleased about that, because you get only a certain kind of study in religion in the late 50s turned the word reduction into a dirty word. It's a sacred, holy word. All of you should be so lucky as to once in your career commit a persuasive reduction into what you should be dreaming of. And so I'm very impatient with that sense. It's like saying the Tiger Woods always got a hold of one. What a reductive guy he is. So just drop that part. Drop that part. Now, the downside. Why you are buying the stock on spec. Master vocabulary next to our present economic condition. As is characteristic of any new muscle in its way into the roster of established treatment, it is a highly virtuoso. Your example of neurophysiology, there's a half the group won't go near it, won't touch it. So it is a wilderness of single examples, enormously persuasive in and of themselves, but far short, that's what makes it difficult to talk about, far short of being readily synthesized at the present point. So you're buying it in a certain sense on spec. And that's okay, that's the way every field begins. You have some folks who are commonly persuasive. There's no commonality to what they bring their eyeglasses to. There's not even a whole lot of commonality about the eyeglasses, but they've carved out something that has an intuitive coherence, but not yet a articulated one. So, and that's a plus, like how we want another, which is also very characteristic of the beginning of the field. I mean, Lawson and McCoy kill Mr. Whitehead, who returns the compliments with the next publication and so on. So it's fun to read because it's a high noon, shoot 'em up. Don't use that to dismiss it. That is, what you're seeing is exactly what happens with the shaking out of a new enterprise. Will it be the? No, there are no such things. But will it be a major player which will affect lots of folks like me who would never dream of doing something like that? Yes, it will. To get to that demotic stage where it is picked up and becomes part of our working vocabulary, working set of assumptions, even if we're not on the front lines of research in those areas. It is not there yet. Or I find great puzzlement as I go from book to book what the hell is in fact holding it all together, except that general idea that we're dealing with mental activity and that surely can't be accidental. You'll note even as you read the big ones, they, except to attack, they rarely rely on one another. They rely on their own work, and then they rely on a whole subfield of work in whatever you want to put after the word cognitive. So the neurophysiologists will rely on studies in neurophysiology. I'm not sure this particular one, but they'll be interested in that question. The folks who are more interested in association will rely on a whole psychological literature, won't touch this, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. So I think it is, if I had to lay money down, the field that I would bet to become of significance. The fact that they went to rituals and fast already endears them to the way, because they are getting around this verbal fixation we've had. The work appears responsible. Folks who have no interest in religion assure me that the stuff they're relying on is good quality stuff, which is all I can ask for, and the colleague is the stuff they can accept. Are they relying on nutcases, or are they relying on sort of workaday work in the field? That's enough for me. So I've bet on it. I think we have to be patient with it for a few more years till it has its sort of shakedown cruise. And as we know, look, the British Academy has invested £10 million in an international project to find out whether Harvey Whitehouse's proposal about the nature of ritual depending on the type of memory that is being involved is plausible or not. Presumably, it doesn't apply. It doesn't cost up £10 million, which is, I understand that, although I guess it happens so many euros today. I figure I thought it was about without having some bearing that there was something there that's worth that big. So I've watched the field. I don't know that I've joined it, but I've watched it certainly. And I expect it will.
Questions? You guys have any?
One back, wait.
No, go.
Well, I know that, especially within your work, you tend to, I'm an anthropology major as well as a studies major. And there's obviously some plenty of dirty words to say about anthropology and ethnography is, an endeavor. But with this, with cognitive science coming out and really interacting with living people and that sort of thing, will this be a new way to have human interaction versus like textual interaction with religion?
Yes, it will not allow itself to be subsumed under anthropology, though we already have seen older books called cognitive anthropology in a sub-field. But interestingly, it's almost entirely based on linguistic data. That's where they get their cognitive anthropology from. The grid in our mind that preforms. And this is kind of obviously past that. Now, will it, there was a second element tagged on to the end of what you said. Will it solve some of the ethical dilemmas anthropology finds itself in? No, the goodwill is non-legislatable. You produce a correct for it. You can't, maybe they'll figure out a way of hardwiring it, so you won't do that, but I doubt it. Let me say that I think that it's a sad moment when a field's major subject matter is picking at its own scabs. I think nothing annoys me more than, so I stopped doing it, than buying by title one of those Oxford anthropology texts for $169 and finding that what the basic message of the book is, I didn't understand my informant and I don't understand myself either. Goodbye. See a psychiatrist to leave me alone. I really resent it. And I think that we have gotten, and a little bit too, self-deprecatory a book. Just because we talk about people who we are not, doesn't automatically carry negative connotations. And I think that what I like actually is the relief of all the bleeping that's been going on, and bleeping, not bleeping. I was there's actually one on the ground. Is the cognitive books make no apologies. I mean, they just full steam ahead. And I kind of like that. But it's kind of refreshing after all the self-gratulation book itself. Message has been received. It need not be done any longer. It's becoming a style of work rather than work itself. And I'm not happy with that.
Question?
I just have, what was the name, sorry, I can't. What was the name of the author who's doing the work on memory in?
Harvey Whitehouse is
Harvey
his
Whitehouse.
name.
Okay, thank you.
Started off doing extraordinary field work on beginning rituals and compared two rituals and found them different and thought the difference between them had to do with memory. And went on then to develop in 2 or 3 books, but not yet the book that presents in a coherent form what his thesis is. They've been largely essays collected together. I love the essay form, which is what I do. But if you really want to have a theory, you better have a beginning, middle, and end, and not just some trial balloons. And it's not quite gotten to that yet. But I know he's coming apparently closer. I know the International Association for the History of Religions will be in Toronto over the summer is devoting a major session with lots of invitees from all over the universe to focus on his particular work. So, and I suspect the British Academy is partly subsidizing the meeting. But yeah, Harvey Whitehouse.
Other questions?
I know nothing about the cognitive people, but
Blessed are you.
but as you are describing them, do you feel like this same dichotomy exists between interpretation and science that you began with?
For them?
For them?
Yeah, it's all on the science side. They know no dirtier word than interpretive. So they and I have considerable ground to cover before we can even begin a conversation. But interpretative is not a word they have a lot of patience for. No. No. Yes, sir.
I, as someone who works a little bit in cognitive approaches to religion, I certainly appreciate your designation of this area as coming field. I would like to observe that although the notion of counterintuitivity is, as you say, prominent, possibly even predominant in this field, it's not at all uncontested. There's a strong, a vocal minority at least, who says on the very contrary. We can look at those perceptual and cognitive biases which are most deeply intuitive in humans and appeal to them instead. And let me, as long as I'm suggesting that, let me be so bold as to say that I think that Hume's notion of a reduction, which is to say that religion is anthropomorphism, is still eminently viable, particularly if you combine it with the logic of Pascal's wager, which says that in a world of interpretation, pardon me, in a world of uncertainty, we are inevitably in an interpretive situation, which I would make the basis of a pair of additions to Hume. So not all cognitivists are immune to the necessity for a sort of heuristic scheme.
No, I quite agree. Some certainly don't agree, and others who would come down most heavily on that side. That's exactly what I mean. We're not at a point yet where a consensus is indeed clear. And as again with any new field, they fire a larger caliber at one another than is necessary. It's not death kill, it's just kill. And as part of maturity, you know, it's the alleged Chinese ritual of the death by 1,000 cuts. If you're really good, that's what you do. There's a famous New Yorker cartoon where two people are dueling and the other guy's head is cut off, and as it sails off, he says, touche. Stupid guy, you're dead! But no, he's following the rules of the game. Touche. We haven't gotten to that point of delicacy, which I think, again, is characteristic of the field when it begins.
And if you, let me just say one short addition here. If we're looking for play as the juxtaposition of things that don't belong together, then perhaps we can throw the rain dance of the chimpanzee together with the prayer of the Buddhist monk. In this sense, if both chimpanzee and monk are in the business of interpretation, and if central to their interest is the discernment in the conceptually uncertain world of hidden agency, and both act toward that world as though there were agency, and in some other view there is not, then they have that in common. The interpretive dilemma and the better safe than sorry strategy that Pascal recommended.
Had I done this 10 years ago, I think I would have said the ethological studies in religion were going to be the common thing. That shows you how accurate a prophet I am. Because they haven't gotten any further. They keep giving me the same examples and basically retreading the same ground. It might look like something that was going to break loose all over the place. I suspect they are going to ultimately be pulled into the orbit of a wider definition of what the common study of religion is. Yeah, the rain dance and all, because it's us that label it that, was much bigger, Burkett and all, 10 years ago than I think it is right now. And so it's going to continue, I think, by snuggling up to a stronger sibling.
So let's switch to the third question, but this is a long section, so why don't everybody just stand up and kind of like get the blood going again. Stay where you are. If you guys switch, stay
Oh my goodness, so I know that.
So stay where you are. This is not a break, so go ahead and sit back down, please. Okay. We're going to go on with question number 3.
Yeah. The whole second half is
Thank you all.
very rocky, so you just go ahead.
In your essay, The Devil and Mr. Jones, you discuss the tragic mass suicide of most of the members of the community of Jonestown in 1978. This event was well publicized by the media, but you say that since the events in Jonestown, I have searched through the academic journals for some serious studies on the name. For the academy, it was as if Jonestown had never happened. You also say that when Jonestown was labeled as a cult in newspapers, the religious studies community was relieved because Jones was not, after all, religious, so there was no professional obligation to interpret him. The lack of scholarship on the subject within the field of religious studies suggests great discomfort with the other, particularly when the other reveals the way religions often do more harm than good. In our class, this observation prompted discussion about whether or not the Academy has a duty to try and understand events like Jonestown and the other in general, and what the result of such understanding might be. Should scholars attempt to understand only to try and fulfill the Enlightenment project of interpretation, or could academic study of events like Jonestown lead to a push by the religious studies community for humanitarian action in cases of religiously caused injustice? You say in The Devil and Mr. Jones that the anthropology of the last century, the study of religions in the Academy has contributed to making more difficult and
naive, ethnocentric formulation of the rules of reason, but this does not require that such rules be denied or suggest that we should slacken in our attempts to formulate them. Do you think that we ought to try and formulate the rules of reason purely within the academy, or do you want scholars to encourage others to employ the rules of reason to prevent events like Jonestown from happening in the future? Our larger question is whether or not you think that religious studies has applications that could be useful for the general public. Could knowledge of religious issues be used to help resolve or prevent conflicts, for example in Iraq, by providing insight into the religions involved in conflicts? Do you think there is any desire amongst the religious studies community to do this sort of work or to write for the general public? If not, what do you think is keeping religious studies scholars from doing this work? We are also interested in whether or not you think understanding the other actually leads to some real action like tolerance or more fruitful cooperation. Do you want scholars to recognize the ordinary humanness of their subjects for purely academic purposes of interpretation? Or do you want scholars to emphasize the ordinary humanness to promote ethics based on the rules of reason? At this point, the direction of the future of the study of religion in the academic departments is unclear. Do you think that religious studies departments can continue to exist as they are now, or do they need demonstrable applications to the wider community?
Of course, obviously, the date of Sam Gill is important. So, several decades since then. But what's interesting is why we can't. Waco. Jonestown was a long way away. Waco was here. Waco directly, they played all the United States government's implications in what I heard. I argue that it might possibly have been what triggered, in fact, Jonestown. Since it was on American soil, and after all, reverberating, Oklahoma City is on the anniversary of Waco, and judging the federal government very much in the light of Waco. So that wouldn't put, it seems to me, an inescapable way what you could perhaps duck with Jonestown. I'm not doing all this, you could duck it, but made it at least possible. There have been a remarkable range of things that have occurred since then. The FBI now attends every meeting of the American Academy of Religion to learn about religion. I'm not sure they've come to the right place, but there they are. Actually, it makes me a little nervous, but nonetheless, there they are. They don't say FBI on their identification tag. They just say their name. It went so far as that I turned it down because I just don't do those sort of things. But I was invited to crawl around some bushes with them and raid, a simulated raid on a group of terrorists holed up. And were they doing it better now? So they're very, no, I mean, it's funny, but they're very deadly serious about this. Not only, after all, did the press give them a very hard time, but a number of very mainline and not so mainline Protestant groups came hell over Waco, and they were very sensitive to that. Now we have encyclopedias of religion and violence, textbooks, courses, journals, specialists, and a number of commercial appeals operating in that area. So it is, if anything, might almost be argued overstudied in some respects. Islam has kicked in lately, unfortunately, in another direction. We now blame it all on them and forget about our own history. Alfred North Whitehead reflects, will there ever come a day when the word religion is not equivalent to the word violence? That was quite a while ago, in the 1920s, but I was just thinking about what he knew about history. And so it has handed an agenda for religious studies that it has not been eager to pick up, but has picked up to some some degree. It is now a subdepartment. A larger question. I largely address fellow academicians, and so most of my rhetoric is speaking to a very limited audience. I speak rather differently when I speak in a public audience. But yes, of course, religion, as our State Department has only, I mean, there's no more pathetic book to read than Madeleine Albright on, guess what I've learned, religion has something to do with how nations behave. I mean, it's a read it and weep sort of book. If that really was a blinding revelation to the folks in Foggy Bottom. Yeah, of course, there's real world stuff. There are scholars of religion who, are in the CIA and other places contributed their expertise, and I think it's great if they don't end up compromised like the anthropologists or not. Elaine and I heard on the way to the airport public radio, is that the name of that thing? A program on this new human terrain project that the Army has running around Afghanistan, which consists of 2 military folks and 2 anthropologists and a translator, because they did without that, trying to make as they would make a map of the terrain. This is now a map of the sort of interests and ideologies of the population. They're very much committed to it. Operation Human Terrain. I think there are things we know. Whether we figure out a way of saying them so they are compelling, it seems to me is another sort of question. The only time I've ever sort of tried to interact with political folks, which was years ago on the Palestinian-Israeli question. You're guaranteed to lose if you go into that question. But anyway, I just pointed out that it seemed to me that Israel had essentially a European notion of a nation. That is one that had secure borders. And that's the language one constantly hears. Islam had a notion that there should be no border between any Muslim and Mecca. That's their definition. That's what this gigantic empire that they keep talking about actually is. A pilgrim gets without impediment from wherever they are in Mecca. So I said, my only contribution I can make to what seems to be a fundamentally insoluble conflict is, what if the Hajj, it wouldn't do any good, there's not a lot of pilgrims are rushing through Israel on their way to Mecca, but what if during the Hajj they simply said, there are no border checks. We're wide open. We respect your understanding. We're just open. Sure, there might be risks, but I mean, hell with all the security, they run the same risks every day. So what if they tried that as an experiment? What would happen? One notices, for example, on settlements that the Israeli side again follows the notion that property is a written instrument. You show a deed, it's your property. The Palestinian side rather tells stories and genealogies. See the olive tree over there. My grandfather planted that 3 generations ago. Remember, it was that year that there was that great big storm and so on. It's that narrative that establishes their ownership. Well, our courts have given up their interest in oral narrative by and large, except for eyewitness testimony, when suddenly they give up all this written crap, and I'm dying to hear what you have to say. But except for that, the written instrument determines. And so, what do you do with this? How do you negotiate? You can explain part of why there's tension. Outside of land grabbing, why there is tension. It's 2 different understandings of what having possession of, having responsibility for a land represents. And I don't know how the hell you negotiate those. but you can at least try to raise your voice to clarify those things, and on through a whole variety of sorts of situations. Had they not thought Koresh was a liar, because he said he needed more time to finish his commentary on the biblical book, the Apocalypse. Well, I didn't know very much. They went home, got to their hotel, they got out their Gideon Bible, and they found no book in it called the Apocalypse. It's called the Revelation of King James and the Gideon, the Revelation, pardon me, of St. John in the King James. So they were convinced he was stalling. There was no such thing. So they ignored his insistence. Well, if you got a guy who's waiting for the obvious Satan to show up, but if he could only finish commentating on the true book, maybe things would be all right. I probably would have given him another couple of days. Gallagher and Tabor, in fact, got into the compound and got the book out for us. We could actually read his commentary. And it's very ordinary after midnight Protestant radio stuff. Before midnight, but the real aficionados know after midnight the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon appears. And it's a wonderful, wonderful genre. There are certainly Protestant groups from whom you would not know there was a book of Revelation in the Bible, and there are also Protestant groups from whom you would not know there was any other book of Revelation in the Bible, and obviously the FBI agents were of that camp. And so here, on a sheer misunderstanding, they made their favorite move. And so you keep thinking of that. You don't need actually a specialist. You just need to open up a book about the Bible and read the first couple of pages, and we'll tell them that, some call it the Revelation and some call it the Apocalypse. So it's not worth giving people other things to trivia. So I'm not sure we're all going to be great on solving real-world problems, but we really, as a field, ought to get better about engaging. I think we have been chary about that. It comes out in part from our history, having spent so much effort emphasizing what a secular field of study we were. We then shrunk beyond definition what the word secular might mean. Like you couldn't have a value if you were secular. You couldn't hold certain truths to be truths, even though you were smart enough to know that the next guy might come right after you, shoot you right down on them, and you may in fact change your mind and agree with him. Secular does not mean you're a tabula rasa of some sort, or a child's magic slate that you get yourself erased all the time. But we spent a lot of effort invested in that argument, a lot of battle scars. And so I think we have been over chary of the ethics because we think we'll be thought religious. We've been over chary at the commenting on the current scene because we'll be thought to be preaching. And I think it's more a question, almost a taste, than it is a question of any principled reason not to engage in the kind of things that I think you've been talking about. So yes, I mean, I welcome that kind of conversation. And I think we're getting better. We are, one of the very few things the AAR has ever done worth a damn is they really have spent a lot of energy on trying to get us a better press on religion, a more informed press. There's nothing worse. Part of the worst sentences I had in that article are from the likes of Time and Newsweek. I mean, this is pretty awful things. And their capacity to cover religion has not been exemplary. And I think through some fellowship programs by other organizations, by the AAR now regularly working our workshops for them, giving awards and all sorts of nonsense. At least it's highlighted that. We don't always translate ourselves well to the public. One of the real translators of the work of scholars is the press, is journalism in the broad sense of the term. whether it's educational TV or it's the daily newspaper. And we haven't a clue how to talk to those folks. We rely on their patience to take all of our endless qualifications, which are absolutely our lifeblood. We fought for every one of those qualifications. All those portions that we take, this is not 100%, so we did that example. All of that, which is what makes us what we live for in many respects. How to learn how to translate that into a simple declarative sentence, even if you say generally, or most of the time. I mean, there are ways of doing it without spending an hour and a half on the, those couple of algae that ain't got no chlorophyll, but are probably plants nevertheless. So I think, yes, we can do better than we've done. We ought to do better. And I think it's one of the things we don't touch very effectively in our curriculum, particularly with respect to graduate students. If you're going to teach, teaching itself is a public activity. Teaching itself is doing very often what the journalist does. Translating, simplifying, making more dramatic in terms of what is dramatic to your audience, not in terms of what's dramatic to scholars, which is something else again. So I think that we could do a lot better on this than we've done, and no reason to be quite as gun-shy about it as I think we have been. But scholars, on the whole, would prefer not to be picked. And one of the problems of getting into hot-button issues is strong interest groups. And we know that. We know the number of scholars who had eggs and so on thrown at them, or they're literally burned. And so we've had a very disturbing history in the last 15 years or so. And so we know that we've got to do better. We've got to find a way of talking better to educate a public, if for no other reason than to keep the eggs away from us. I mean, to just make it clear what we are claiming when we claim something, and what in fact we're not claiming when we claim something. So all of that I think is getting done. But I cheerfully pass it on to your age. There's no principle rejection.
Sure, one short question.
I applaud your, if I understood correctly, your call that more of us in religious studies should be applying our expertise to helping the public understand situations, particularly where there's violence concerned. What I didn't understand is, were you saying that for yourself, that your encouragement of that is a matter of taste rather than principle? Or would you say that there's a principle, perhaps even a moral principle, involved in your suggestion that we pursue that engagement with these political issues more?
I would say there's an educational principle. I'm not sure there's a principle of scholarship. There's not. I'm reluctant to add a lot of responsibilities to scholarship. One of the weaker branches we have, but I don't want to overload it that much. So I prefer to say there are some who think they need to do it, and there are some who would just as soon not. And since I suspect that those who think they need to do it will do a better job than those who just as soon not, I'm not sure I want to disturb that one either. On the other hand, it seems to me, when you're in the process of education, anybody who leaves out of anything they study the essentially political task or ethical task that education is blind. And so I would find it an urgent, if it's being ignored, an urgent educated task, which it seems to me would give you an audience more clamoring that might get some of the scholars because they're, oh, there's butter over there. Let me go in that direction. So it seems to me that it might turn out to be, in fact, a benefit to take that side more seriously. So I put the morals on the education side and not just on that little funny group called scholars.
I'll just say that my personal experience confirms your assumption that one can, in fact, gain a larger audience by trying to speak to a larger audience.
Let's stop at this point, take a 10-minute break. Please return promptly because we have 2 more call sessions.